Welcome to Storytalking. Storytalking is a weekly podcast series about creativity and storytelling, and it is exclusive to members of Launchora Storytellers program. I'm your host, Lakshdatta, the guy who started Launchora, and in every episode I talk to a new storyteller that we feature here in LSP. We'll talk about creativity, we'll talk about storytelling, and we'll talk about the person behind the stories. This episode 1 of Storytalking, my guest is Lynn Cornelis. She's 21, lives in Belgium, and is studying to become an elementary school teacher. Now, if you've been on Launchora for a few months, you've probably read one of her stories. She's a fantastic writer. She was featured in the first issue of The Storyteller, Spring 2017, and her story is called To the Silent Ones. She writes about her life, she writes about her struggles with self-harm and depression, and how she found hope, love, and happiness. So here is episode 1 of Storytalking with Lynn Cornelis. One way, people use Launchora is to just write and talk to each other. But one of the things that I've really seen people want is to better understand where stories come from and why is it that we're inclined to be creative as human beings. And one of the best ways to do that is to just have these informal, casual conversations so people can get a better idea about what who you are. Where does creativity come from in you, why you chose to do this, why you chose to write the things you write, and just to every week with having a different person in focus, it's a way to inspire others who may still be figuring out what they want to do, or maybe they're hesitant that I don't think I'm ready, I don't think my story matters. So it's a way to get those people to open up and see that everyone has insecurities, everyone has self-doubt, and it's really the only difference between a person and a storyteller is that the storyteller just decides to tell stories. There isn't really that much of a difference between the two. One of the things that I really like about what you write about is that you're writing to the people who are reading it. You're not writing to the universe. You're writing to the one person who is reading that story right now. And I think that's something that I really relate to. Like when I write, I'm not thinking who's going to read this and how many people are going to read this. I'm just writing to the one person that decided to launch that story. Like today, about almost 40 to 45% of our users are under 18. And and that's when, and I think you started writing a year ago on Launchora, right? It was a little over a year ago. So I think you may have noticed that a lot of the people that write comments on your story or are reading your story are really young girls. And I think that's why they really related to what you were writing, because you were writing about your teenage years, and they were still, they were still teenagers, and they're able to, even if they're not able to express themselves yet, when they read the stuff you're writing, they kind of get this, aha moment that there's someone who feels the way I feel right now. And that's been one of the amazing things about having writers like you on the platform, because you're writing something so real and honest. One thing I'm really curious about is, can you remember the first ever memory of interacting with some sort of a story, like whether it was a book or something your parents told you?
I think on the subject of storytelling, I started with reading poems, and I have a really clear thought about a website I used to be on when I was like I don't know, 14, 15,
Yeah.
and it's called I don't. It was a site from the Netherlands
Yeah.
where everyone could post poems and all, and you could post it in every way. So you could post it in a poem kind of way, but also in a a storytelling kind of way.
Hmm.
And that's actually the first time that I think I can remember I got in contact with that because yeah, I still think about that site a lot actually because I used to write on that a lot and I used to read not everyone's, but a lot of people's poems, and
Yeah.
my sister was on it too. So that was our kind of way of telling stories through poems.
And were these poems in English or in Dutch or in everything?
Yeah, you could choose, but mostly I wrote them in Dutch, and I remember that my sister used to write them in English, and but I was 14 and I didn't know English back then. So, but I thought it was really cool to write in other languages, and I also think that because of that I started trying to write in English too,
So
from what
you
I can
didn't
remember.
know English really back then, or when did you study it then, or get to
No,
start using it?
well, I honestly I learned it by myself through
Okay.
TV, through the computer, and I think it was like the age I started to know that my sisters and other people wrote poems in English. And at first I didn't write in English though, but at first I learned English, of course.
Yeah.
But then I thought when I learned English, I hope you still get me, yeah, but when I learned English, I learned that it is easier for me because I find it a really beautiful language to express myself in English than in my own language.
Really?
if Yeah, it's true because I all my stories I write on Launchora, except for one maybe, started out in English
Yeah.
instead of my own language.
And so even writing English, you just taught yourself by reading?
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
reading
some
books?
really because when I got into when in school you don't get English until I think until high school, and it's really basic in high school. And I was always the first of my class because I learned it through internet and television, and I didn't need subtitles or something. I just learned it from myself. So I don't. I just like one time said whoop, and I I I, I knew how to speak English.
I learned English was our in school, it was our first language. So we had both. My native language is Hindi, so we were taught both. I
Oh yeah.
think movies and TV shows and books is what really taught me how to write. Like reading English was taught in school, but everything else
Hmm.
I learned by watching movies, like to see how people talk, how they interact, and how people
Yeah.
communicate, how they express themselves. I think it was all through stories. Like that's why I think I was always attracted to storytelling, just because I was always watching something or reading something. When was the story that you so I think if I remember, your first story was about your best friend, right? The one you wrote on Launchora, right?
Yeah, that's
And that
correct.
was the one
Yeah.
that a lot of people read and connected with. I remember that. So
Yeah.
was that the first thing you had ever written, or had you written before that as well?
No, I had written before that as well. Um, because you know Tumblr, right? So the
Yes.
blogging
Yes.
sites. Yeah. So I when I was 16, I had a Tumblr, and I used to write on that too, but just short stuff, not really stories, but just little poems or just really tiny text. And then the stories I wrote were just for myself
Yeah.
and for actually no one else to see. But um, yeah, actually, now that I think about it, I think the first real story I put out in the world was actually the one about my best friend. I think so,
And I mean, that was not a, I remember when I read it, I was like, oh, this is different. Like there was, I think that mustn't, so many times you don't get to talk to the people who you read, you know? And that's one of the
yeah.
cool things about having to be getting to be a part of Launchora for me is to have people talking to each other after they've read something that person's written. So
Hmm.
I didn't know you when you wrote that story, and but there was something in the way you were writing that I just felt like I don't know how, but this person has been able to somehow make me understand what she's going through, you know? So
Yeah.
when you were writing that, did you like did how did you feel when you were writing that? Because it was very personal.
Yeah, I was devastated actually when I wrote that. I remember crying when I wrote that because that's actually the first story I wrote in Dutch first and then translated to English.
Okay.
Because so I started writing it in Dutch because I was in a really big fight with my best friend and I lost her and I wanted her to know what I was feeling. So I wrote first I wanted to write directly to her, but
Yeah.
then I thought like, no, that's not gonna work. So I wrote to someone else out there, but I had no one to share it with. And then I remembered that I had Launchora because I already knew the platform, and then I decided that to translate it in English, and then I posted it on Launchora. But I just wanted someone to know because when I had it in Dutch, no, I had no answer. I couldn't just go to my dad and be like, hey, here, read this,
Right.
because that's how I feel. I just wanted someone else, someone that I didn't know,
Yeah.
to know like that. And I couldn't do that in Dutch, and that's why I uh, put it on Launchora so that maybe someone knew, and then a lot of people knew because I got a lot of
Yeah.
feedback in the story.
I was going through your stories a few days ago, and I was just seeing that so many times, like I don't write a lot of personal stuff just because I don't know, actually don't know why. I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet, why I don't write about my life. But like I just find fiction more comfortable. But
Yeah,
the the thing that I was noticing through your stories and just what you're writing about is that so much of them are is you kind of sharing how you're feeling in the moment, or
yeah,
it's either that or you're thinking about what you were feeling in a moment that was not desirable. Like it wasn't the best moment where you're thinking back at it and you're reflecting on it today. So
yeah,
one of
yeah.
the things that I like, how does it feel to you when you just look at the things you wrote, like, 2 years ago or a year ago or 6 months ago? Like, can you still feel like you're still that Lynn? Or is the new Lynn uh just has new layers on top and that girl is still there?
Yeah, it's like I got a lot of layers because
Yeah.
I I try to avoid I try not to think about who I was um when I was 16, 17. But when I write, I have to think about it. And but like, for example, the story about my best friend, I I maybe read it 2 times after, and then I think never again, because I don't know if it's weird, but I just don't read it. And I know it's there, and I know it's what I felt, but I don't want to read it a year later
Yeah,
because it reminds me of what I felt back then,
right.
and I guess somewhere deep in my mind, I don't want to be reminded of that. I don't know if that's weird, but
No, I can understand. I have a lot of things that I've written that I'm never gonna publish, and just because they are that personal, and they were just meant for me I consider writing to be like playing a video game where I'm basically pressing save every time I write something. I'm pressing save on my life. Like it's how I'm processing
yeah.
who I am today. So a lot of times I would read, like I've written things that I wrote, let's say, 4 years ago or 2 years ago, and I know it's
Mhm.
there. I know I'm not going to publish it, and I know I'm never really going to read it again until until I
Yeah,
feel like I'm too far off from who that guy was, and maybe one day I
yeah,
can use it in a story that I write.
yeah. I get that.
Do you see writing as a way of, um, you know, revealing or figuring out who you are? Or do you want to stay in that way of sharing? Or do you see yourself writing something like more poetry or more fiction, as you go?
Well, sometimes I try to change it a bit. Um, for example, um, last year, I started writing with the thought of writing a book,
Yeah.
and that was all fiction. And I actually never write fiction. But then I started writing more on Launchora, and
Yeah.
that was all the real me.
Yeah.
So I stopped writing uh, what was supposed to be a book one day, and I think it's got like 3 chapters right now,
Yeah.
and I want to pick it up again, but something in me is I just have to convince myself again to um, start writing fiction again instead of non-fiction, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I so I wrote when I started Launchora, I wrote a very long book, which was completely nonfiction. It was my 2 year journey of starting Launchora, like how it went from an idea to being a real place. And when I
Yeah,
finished it, I felt really good. I thought, oh, I'm gonna do this a lot because up until I had done that, I wasn't writing fiction that much. So,
yeah,
and I didn't really consider myself a writer in any way. I was just trying to share whatever I wrote in college. And
hmm,
but when I finished writing that, it felt like such a heavy thing to let out that I still
yeah,
feel like I'm not ready to go back into writing about myself or the things that I think about or go through. And that's why I choose
hmm,
fiction because to me uh, it's a way to take a break from being who I am, and then I can just become a version of me through whatever character I'm writing.
yeah,
So that's what attracts me to fiction for now. But you never know what you're going to be writing a year from now.
yeah,
That's
indeed.
like the interesting part. The so
Yeah, that's true.
one of the fears that I have, and I want to ask you if you feel this way because you write different stuff than I do, but whenever I'm writing something, I always have this a part of me has this fear that I'm never going to write anything again. Like this is the best thing I've written, and I'm never going to be able to do better than this. Have you felt that
Yeah,
in what you've written so far?
yeah. I got that with my story for the the To the Silent Ones
Yeah,
story.
the
I
one in
was
the
really proud of
storyteller.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, in the Storytell program, I was really proud of that. And actually, I haven't. written a lot since then because every time I try to write, I was like, no, it's not good enough. It has to be better, but I can't get it better, and it's like that. But I try and I try, and I think that I still don't think that I wrote a better story than to the silent ones, but I know that one day I will get the better story.
I think that's the amazing thing, right? Because when you think that and you're writing something and you're like, oh, it has to be better. When I'm writing something, I'm like, oh, it has to be like it won't get better than this. The funny thing is that as soon as I finish writing something, I'm already like, oh, I can't wait to write something else. Like I'm immediately like
Yeah,
I'm in love with what I'm writing when I'm writing it. And as soon as I'm done
yeah,
and I press publish, I want to be in love with something else.
yeah, me
So so
too.
that's kind of like the good version of that fear that it's just between you and your mind. And because when people read what
Yeah,
you write, they're not thinking, "Oh, her last story was better," you know? They're just thinking, "Oh, she said something
yeah,
that I can relate to."
yeah. That's true.
When did you feel like what you have to say is something, worth sharing? Like, or is that something that ever popped in your head, or were you ever worried about people accepting or caring about what you're saying?
Yeah, actually, um, because I remember uh, on Launchora, it was a year ago, I think also, um, the what was it called? Um, there was like my Silent Society story. Can you remember
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
Yeah, I like that you had to write a story about society. Write the future was it? I think.
yeah, yes, we did
Yeah,
that last year. Yeah,
yeah, indeed. So about that, and I decided to write about society, and it actually I remember getting your email about all the information about it, and I was so excited because I saw society, and I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to write to society about the problems of self harm in from girls and boys,
yeah.
and but it took me so long. I can remember it. I changed the story like 10 times because every time that I wrote something, I was like, no, no, people don't want to know this, and you're doing
Yeah.
it all wrong, and it's not worth it to share this with the rest. And I got really insecure about that. And one day I just started writing again, and because I left it for like 2 weeks, and then I started it again, and I was like, okay, this is it. I'm just going to ignore all my insecurities, and I'm just gonna post it. And then I posted it, and it got read, and it got popular on Launchora. So it's like, yeah, okay, that's a good thing.
Do you think what was more, what felt like better, like letting it go and putting it out there? Like, did that feel good on its own, or was it when people started responding, did you get this feeling like, okay, no, I wasn't wrong about putting this out there?
Yeah, I think about the when people started responding to it because I still remember it very clearly. Like the first 2 days, I think it got like 5 reads and 10 reads, but
Yeah.
not really a lot. And I was like, okay, people are reading it, but I don't know, knowing he's saying anything about it. So is it good? And I had so many insecurities. And then one day I woke up and my phone was like Launchora, 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 Launchora. And it's so what? So people started recognizing my story, and and I got this rush from whoa, it's actually being read, and people are actually interested in what I wrote, and it was actually a really good feeling.
Yeah, it's hard to describe how that feels, I guess,
Yeah, yeah,
when
it is.
someone comes and says that, you wrote what I feel. I think that's one of the things that
Yeah,
people said a lot about what you were writing. Like you were able to put
yeah,
into words what I feel. And
yeah,
I think that's very important, especially for, so like I don't know if you know, but almost 70% of Launchora is girls. And
mm,
I think because of writers like you, they feel even safer to talk about what they're going through, whether it's something as, you know, human as just heartbreak or something as serious as self-harm and depression and wanting to, end your life. I think the more people feel like they are supported and the more they're able to find courage through others, the better it is for everyone else who could be going through that and is just silent about it themselves. That makes me think about this thing that um like I rarely write about anything that is super personal or you know dark, at least what people would call dark, not in a bad way, but just going into that part of your life where
yeah.
you don't necessarily want to relive that moment. So, but you still have, you especially into the silent ones, you went back to when you were, hurting yourself and you were able to talk about that. Where do you think that courage came from to not only revisit that moment, but to put it into perspective in who you are today and to put a positive, you know, spin on it that this is who I was, and if I wasn't who I was, I wouldn't be who I am. Like, where did you find that internal, courage?
Um, I think um, it has to do with photography because in my two final years of high school, I studied photography at school, and we had to participate with a contest, and the contest was called contrast, and you could choose whatever you wanted to do. You could choose old or young, rich or poor. But I wanted to step out of that box, and I looked at my own arms, and my wrist is full of scars, and I wanted to show the contrast between an arm full of scars and an arm that is unharmed. And I won the contest with that picture, and there was,
Wow.
yeah, 1,000 people participated, and my photo was first prize. And I think that was the beginning of my courage, because people acknowledge, I got to see that people, when you show them something, when you show them something
Yeah.
hard, like self-harm, if you confront them about it, they actually they they can be really nice about it, and that you don't have to be scared about opening yourself up about it. And that's where I when I started realize when I realized that I don't have to hide myself, and that I had to just get it out into the world. And I think from that moment I started to out myself more
Hmm.
through photos or in my writing.
Do you think that
But
writing was one of the first steps of you revealing, just like you talk about hiding yourself, especially in your stories, even with Silent Society, you were hiding yourself with long sleeves and everything. Do you think writing was your first way of really showing people who Lynn is?
yeah, from to show who I am, it really was through my writing, especially through the silent stories. I mean, silent society stories, because it was the first story that I got out online that was about me hurting myself. I never quite shared something so personal about myself with a whole community.
Yeah.
Like I did it on Tumblr, but I knew I had like 2 followers, so I knew no one was going to read it. So, but on Launchora, I knew like if I put it out now, at least at least 10 people read it, and I
Yeah.
mean, this it was a big step for me actually to post the Silent Society story, but I'm glad I did because indeed a lot of people can relate, and I never thought so many people could relate, and I think it's kind of sad that so many people can relate, but I'm
Yeah.
also glad. So to let me know and them know that we're not alone in this. Like,
I would completely. I've felt that feeling too. Like sometimes when I read the things people write on Launcher, I get a little. It can feel sad that because so many of these people are 10, 12 years younger than me, and
yeah,
when I was their age, I was having different issues. But like when I went to college, there was a little. I didn't know this until later, but my first year of college, my first 2 years of college, I had like a it wasn't consistent, but there was long periods of loneliness, and I had insomnia. I wasn't sleeping. I was at one point I was taking pills to go to sleep, and
yeah,
I didn't think about it because in the moment it felt like what good is thinking about it going to do? What good is it going to do? And then, but now when I read all these people opening up and sharing it, it makes me think that in one way it's a little sad because it tells you what a stranger is really thinking, that you cross these people on the street, you see them in malls and in movie theaters, and you don't know what they're going through, but they find this place online where they don't know anyone and they want to share it. And in that way I feel really good that at least they're opening up, at least they're finding each other through, even if there's people, you're sitting there in Belgium and there's people in Egypt and Brazil and Morocco and India and Philippines reading it and relating to it, and something that you know they wouldn't have had access to before. They wouldn't have been able to find that kind of connection before. So it's one of the things that I really want to help improve. Like there's one thing to give people a place to talk and to share what they feel and share their story. But how do we help them improve and get better as they go? Like, I think you remember we even did something with Mental Health Awareness Month where
yeah,
we asked people to write about, telling each other you're wonderful. And it was one of I didn't expect it to be that popular. I just thought that, some people are going to write and share, but a lot of people came out and talked about it. And it was one of those things where I was like, I wish we could do more of this. I wish we could figure out different ways of getting people to either just get someone to talk to or get any sort of professional help. And so I hope that as we go forward, we're able to figure out a way to do that.
I think in a way you're already doing that with Launchora, because I think that now I'm 21 and I'm writing stories about when I was 16 and helping others.
Yeah.
But I think that when I was 16 and I discovered Launchora, like when I was 16 right now, and I was still going through those things, and I got to share my story on Launchora and people would read it and would react on it, it would really help me feel less alone. And I think that if I couldn't, if I had Launchora when I was depressed, that it would have been easier because in a way you have someone or something. And when I was 16 or 17, I didn't have anything. And I think that if I had Launchora, it would have really helped me.
That is a very nice thing to say.
I
I
really,
hope people realize that I did not ask you to say that.
yeah,
This
no,
wasn't planned. I
no,
wasn't
no, it
giving you a
wasn't.
sign to do that.
No,
That was all you.
no,
No, that's
I
very
mean
sweet.
it. Yeah,
I hope that we can definitely do that for others
yeah,
and collectively, like one of the things I really like to do, and this would really start happening more now that the program is going to get bigger with these podcasts and things, that I hope that we're able to give a voice to these ideas so people can tell me, they can tell anyone, other users, they can go to the bar and talk about it, but just tell me what we can do next, or tell each other, how you want to help the other person, or just complete strangers. I think that would be the next, over the next
yeah,
year, I really hope that we're able to do something even more impactful.
yeah.
But that's very nice of you to say.
No problem.
The that brings me to this question. You were talking about, where you found the courage to talk about this, but what about just that inspiration to, because you're not like, I couldn't tell that English wasn't something you had studied, you know? Like when
Yeah,
you're writing really profound things. You're saying things that not only are they powerful, but they're really well constructed. So how were you able to, or how do you find like that aha, like, oh, this is a good line? Like, do you even feel that when you're writing, or are you just like super
sometimes.
honest and nice to yourself? We were like, I can't believe I wrote something so amazing.
No, to be honest, um, I don't really know because when I read in English also, but when I read books, I buy books in Belgium that are English instead of Dutch. And one of my favorite books is Winter Girls by Laurie, I don't know, Laurie something.
Okay.
And it's about a girl and she has um anorexia and she does self harm. And when I was self harming, that was one of the books I started reading, and I think about that book a lot because that book showed me that that there are other people who write about self harm and stuff. And there's another writer. He's a spoken poem artist that I
Okay.
really look up to, and he has it's Rudy Francisco, and one of his poems, the first poem I knew actually from him is to to the new boyfriend slash scars, and he starts
Yeah.
his poem with the question, "Do you want to know how I got these scars?"
Yeah.
And that's what I try to keep in mind because whenever I write, I try to ask myself a question, and in the process of writing, I try to answer that question. Like the line, do you want to know how I got these scars? That's actually mm, I don't know how to say it, but I want it's like I want people to know how I got my scars. And that's actually so Rudy Francisco, the writer of that poem, He's one of my biggest inspirations from writing, and I can't. It's hard for me to tell you why, because it's just a stupid explanation about one sentence, actually,
That's okay.
about one
You
question.
can try.
Yeah, but um, like when I wrote to the silent ones, it was it was like I was asking myself what I wanted the readers to know about my scars and my past and my thoughts,
Yeah.
and I tried to dig into myself about it. And I don't know, I think that's I kept Rudy Francisco in line because a lot when I write and I get stuck, I try to listen to his poems again because he has a lot of them on YouTube, and I always get back to him because there's always one word or one sentence that he says that can get me into the process of writing, and it's always something different.
Yeah.
So it's kind of my biggest inspiration.
No, that's very nice.
I'm really, I don't know how to say this. I'm when I it's a really cliche thing to say because like 1,000 people have said it already, and I almost read it everywhere online, but it feels like I can only write when I am either falling in love or falling apart. I hate that line. I
I think you've
hate.
said that before.
Yeah, see, I see it everywhere online, but I only write about heartbreak or about me losing myself.
First of all, you shouldn't worry about thinking that you only write when you're in one of those spaces,
Yeah,
because what you're talking about are essential elements of a human life, you know? We're either, I think we're either growing or we're staying the same. And it's better to
mm,
grow, and you cannot grow if you're not falling down and getting back up, you know? And
yeah,
that part of your journey and whatever you end up sharing, it is always going to it's definitely always going to help you to write about it, but it will
yeah,
help so many other people that you don't even know. Like so many strangers already relate to so much you write about. And as far as writing about love, like I'm the last person to stop someone from writing about love. I write more about love than I have been in love. It's one of those things where it's just it's one of those experiences that when you're in it, it really does become like it was always there. And that's why when you're out of it, it feels so heavy,
yeah.
because it's like a really friendly virus that is really friendly until it's not, you know?
Yeah,
And that's
until
why
it's
it's
not.
there's
Yeah,
so much to explore there. What would you like to say to any of the other Lins out there that could be listening to this?
I I think just that you should know that you you don't have to be afraid of anything. Not of life, not of yourself, not of boys who will break your heart or girls who will break your heart or mothers or fathers that will break your heart. You don't have to be afraid because it will happen, and it will suck, and it will get better. So I hope be I know it's human to be afraid, and it's normal to be afraid, but you shouldn't let it consume you and shouldn't let it eat you up like I did to myself 3 years ago. So because you will get out of it. of the fear of living.
Yeah, that's very nice. It almost sounds like you wrote that down beforehand.
No,
I
it was
can I
straight
can
from the heart.
guarantee that you did not because I can see you
No,
and you were not reading from a piece of paper.
no.
So that's very beautiful. Thank you for listening to episode 1 of Story Talking. We release a new episode every Saturday. And make sure you check out episode 2, where I'll be talking to our next featured storyteller, Jessica Day.